Welcome to the Providence College Podcast. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Email podcast@providence.edu with questions or comments. Go Friars!
Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Chittum, and I'm joined as always by PC videographer and producer Chris Judge. As a major gift officer at Providence College, I've had the opportunity to meet with a number of people in the Friar family who have just impressive stories, and we're happy to share some of their stories here with you. So today we're joined by Sandy Oliveira. Sandy is the Executive Director of Financial Aid. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Matt.
No, it's a pleasure having you, and I think this topic, especially this time of year, for PC parents or potential PC parents is kind of top of mind as they enter the admissions process. We just had the early action and early decision deadlines. So that's certainly something that people are thinking about. So just for reference, how long have you been at PC and working in the financial aid office?
I've been at Providence College for almost 11 years. February will mark my anniversary.
Oh, that's great. So why did you choose PC from a work standpoint?
Actually, I've been in financial aid for a very long time. I grew up in it. I started as a work-study student when I was an undergraduate, and I have traveled my career through a variety of different institutions. I've been at a community college. I've been at four-year state. Prior to Providence College, I was at Brown University for 14 years and was looking for the next step. And I was looking for a private school and somewhere that had a reputation that I wholeheartedly respected. And when the opportunity became available at Providence, it was just a nice fit for where I wanted to be career-wise and in the state of Rhode Island.
Right, and that too, not a big change in commuting.
No,
from Brown to PC.
Not at all. Not at all.
So you mentioned that you were a work-study student, so in the financial aid office. So how did that spur an interest in financial aid, or did it precede that? Or?
Not initially. It's an interesting story because when I first started, financial aid was never on my career horizon. I was like many other kids and working with their families, filling out financial aid at our house. It was fight night at my parents' house because we were trying to gather the materials, and financial aid, it can be complicated in its questions, even as long ago as when I was going to school. And at the time, you didn't select your work-study position. You actually listed where your interests might lie, and you were placed in a job. And there was a couple of different lines and opportunities listed on the application, financial aid being one of them. And my mother said, please put financial aid down because I don't ever want to fill a form out again in my life. So with that, I ended up, they scooped me up because not many students had listed that as a choice at the time. And I worked with some wonderful people. But after college, it wasn't really where I was thinking I wanted to be. I was looking at some other options, and a job came available at the local community college. And I had had experience, and it was something I went to go do, and I found that I absolutely loved it for so many other reasons, because it's a very different experience when you work in the field, not as a student, but as an employee of a department.
Right. So you've had a pretty wide range of experiences in terms of the kinds of institutions that you've worked, from community colleges to Brown to PC. So you kind of runs the full gamut. So how has financial aid changed, not only in terms of the time when you started till now, but just how it can change from institution to institution?
Well, they're very different. They have different, they all have different initiatives. They all have different populations that are primary. For example, when you're at a community college, you have students that are local. You have students that are probably more part-time, stopping their careers. So they're working that around their individual schedules. And it's actually a very challenging population because you don't always have that very consistent track in terms of where students are coming in. The state colleges are very different than any of the privates by way of resources. The amount that an institution can provide is really can really differ from school to school based on their endowment or based on what kind of resources they have to give back in aid. And when you're looking at a state institution, while their cost is absolutely lower, so is the amount of aid that they're able to provide access to students. So the opportunities from Brown and Providence College have been uniquely different than my first two. Providence is even further different than Brown in that we have athletic aid here, and we also have there's a whole merit is something that the Ivy League didn't provide. So academic scholarships, athletic scholarships was a new thing for me in terms of trying to understand how that fit into the equation of families trying to find resources to be able to manage the cost of college.
Right. So that brings up a good question. So for the vast majority of people who are applying to BC are not going to receive athletic scholarships.
Correct.
They're very hard to come by. With that said, a pretty decent percentage could receive merit scholarships either from PC and or from other institutions. So how does merit scholarships affect what happens in the financial aid office?
Well, merit scholarships are absolutely a resource that a student might receive that has to be incorporated into a financial aid package or a need-based award, which is where my office comes into it. My office with need-based means that the financial strength of a family factors into how much money they may receive from the institution, where when you're looking at merit, it's based on a student's academic ability or some other leadership quality that they have. But when you're looking at need-based aid, we can only give resources between the cost minus what we expect the family to contribute. The difference is the most we can give in financial aid of any kind. So if a student receives merit, that has to be factored into a resource that the student would receive.
Got it. So you have a couple different factors. You have the amount the school costs per student. Then you have the amount that the family can be expected to contribute.
Correct.
And then the gap between those two numbers is where financial aid comes into play.
Yeah, and we can't give any more than that difference. So if you have a student that receives a merit scholarship that might equate to the full value of tuition, but their eligibility for aid might be $20,000, then they're not going to get any other aid from us. The merit is going to satisfy that amount. So it's only when there's resources that you still have left after you incorporate your merit scholarship in the need-based award. And if you don't have merit, then we would provide financial aid through a combination of institutional grant funds, federal grant possibilities, and then we would usually look to some kind of student loan or work opportunity for students.
Got it. So how do you determine the financial strength of a family?
We actually, here at Providence, we look at two different types of applications because they give us very different information. Every student, regardless of where they attend school, has to complete the free application for Federal Student Aid or FAFSA. And that provides income, some assets, and some information about household family members and who's in college. But it doesn't give us a real strong understanding of what's really going on with that family by way of other streams of income or some of their assets such as home equity or other businesses. And it also doesn't give us any other information about who those other family members are and where they're going to school. And it may not give us information on expenses. So we look at both applications to try and understand the family's true income and what their financial strength is from their assets. There is a standardized formula that is based in the federal calculations and also in our institutional approaches that we look at in terms of trying to figure out where we think that family has the ability to manage the cost of college, either in that year through past savings or for future borrowing.
So the number that's given to the school after completing the FAFSA form, that's the same number for each institution, correct?
Well, the FAFSA, yes. That if you have an information that you provide on the FAFSA, then that's a pretty good match from school to school. If we look at the information, the contribution that we look at when we use the data coming from the College Scholarship Service profile, it can vary. Because, again, institutions can decide their own approach. So some institutions may choose to look at home equity differently than others. Some institutions may count a brother or sister in graduate schools, where in the number of college where we wouldn't. So there's schools that have some choice about what they consider for the distribution of their own institutional funds.
Got it. All right. So I can see that it's not just an objective number. There is a lot of subjectivity that comes to even the family financial strength piece.
That is correct.
All right. So then you have the gap between the family's financial strength and the cost of the school. Mm-hmm. And then say you were to assume that a school, or that a student, I should say, didn't receive any merit money. How do you then decide, or how do you determine kind of the percentage of the cost for that student that would be aided?
We have an institutional packaging policy, which means that based on a need level or the amount of eligibility that a student has, we would give a certain amount that we would give in student loans, and then a portion in work, and then based on our resources, then we would provide an institutional grant to fill in some of that difference up to what we're able to. At Providence, we're not always able to meet full need,
Right.
meaning that if a student qualifies for $20,000, I may not have $20,000 through the combination of sources to provide, because I have quite a few students that show eligibility that would have met our deadlines, and so I have a commitment to try and provide what I can to those that have met our on-time deadlines.
Got it. So there's kind of like a percentage of need met.
Correct.
In a way. All right, that's understandable. So you have that, and then you obviously have this other cohort of student that may not have any need from a financial, from the from the financial aid perspective, or the FAFSA or the CSS profile. But are those students still eligible to receive merit scholarships through the admissions office?
Yeah, merit scholarships are actually determined well before we determine need-based aid. And merit scholarships are decided at the time a student is invited to attend the college. So they would make that distinction right at the admission stages. And so a student who doesn't qualify for need-based aid isn't ruled out from being considered for any merit funding. And I think it's important to note to families, too, that sometimes when you have a student who may not qualify when they apply that first year, it doesn't mean that they may not have eligibility in the subsequent 3 years if something changes in their family. So if they have a second one that starts college at the time that somebody is in school, and you may have two instead of one, that could be a factor that would change the financial aid eligibility down the road. And so for need-based financial aid, you really have to think about it from a 4-year perspective and not just the result you get when you get that first response in your freshman year.
That makes sense. So I can see how families, in going back to your own, when you went through this process, when you were an undergrad or entering your undergraduate years, that can be confusing, especially for parents who are going through it maybe the first time. So are there common misconceptions that people have with the financial aid process, either generally or when it comes to PC?
I think that families will rule themselves out just because they think that their income's too high. And if you go back to the conversation we had just a few minutes ago where you talked about cost of attendance, that what the school costs can matter. So if you're looking, some schools are well in the $50,000 and $60,000 range a year overall, and there's not many families that are equipped to manage that out of pocket. So I think that families sometimes will self-select themselves out of the process because they just have an assumption that they're not going to qualify for aid before they even go through it to find out where they stand. I think that there are also times that if they make a decision that an older son or daughter may not receive financial aid at the institution that they went to, that means that's going to also not be the case for a younger child that's coming up through it. And I always say apply no matter what. At least you know where you stand at the beginning, and things do change. And again, cost may differ, the number in college may differ, and down the road, if something changes in your household, such as a loss of income or a job loss, then you're already within you've already got the steps going for us to be able to try and help at that stage if it changes from what you had when you filed.
Right, and that can obviously be a difficult conversation to have with the family. The one you just mentioned, if something, if there's a job loss or some extraneous force has impacted the family's finances in a certain way, what are some of the more challenging aspects of the job, either for you and your staff?
There's a lot of them. Sometimes it's really challenging to listen to some of the situations that present themselves from families through nothing they could have planned themselves. For a while, job loss was a big factor that we heard families coming to, because when the economy really just kind of went downhill, we had so many families that had saved and saved and saved. They had a plan. They knew what they were going to do for their children. And then they're sitting there almost like they're starting over, where they don't have income. They're not sure how they're going to manage mortgage expenses. They may now be paying medical expenses at a much higher rate through a COBRA plan that really can eat up at monthly resources. And they're making some really tough decisions about where they place their funding. But at the heart of it, they don't want their child to have to interrupt their academic career. And so they're really looking to us to try and see what we might be able to do to help. We've also had some incredibly heartbreaking conversations with parents who are facing some very difficult illnesses. We have had families where a parent has passed while the student has been in school, and what does it do? Where they're trying to pick up the pieces and be able to kind of make sure that the student can still achieve their their dream of graduating. And we've had some families who have faced bankruptcy and a whole host of things with older grandparents that they're trying to care for. We really hear an awful lot of real personal information from families because they're really just trying to make it work, and we're trying to help guide them through the process and consider what we can.
You spoke earlier about the job loss when the economy went downhill. Mm-hmm. I think you're referencing 08, 09, 07, 08,
Correct.
09.
Yep.
And that was when the Angel Fund was started.
That is correct.
So is that if you could just talk about that for a second, and also just the process by which someone would go basically request Angel Fund grant money.
The Angel Fund actually was started at a point in time that was so welcome to the members of this office in terms of trying to help families that we clearly understand have eligibility for help, and we just weren't able to match resources to the need. And it was really just such a challenging time, and we didn't want to see students, like I said, have to interrupt their academic career. So families would definitely come to us for if they had those conditions I outlined, such as the job loss. And we do have an appeal form or a special condition form that sits on our website that outlines those criteria, those circumstances that we would consider to relook at a financial aid application to see what more we can do. On the other side of it, too, there are times we have students that might owe just a little bit of money. They may have, it's the difference between them having the ability to manage a health insurance sometimes for a very needy student, or there might be somebody they have been declined on all the loans and they don't have any other options for financing and may not find a co-signer, and they may need $1,000 or they may need a couple of $100 to clear their bill or settle it for the semester. We've had students that have come in, and a lot of it is on one-on-one appointments where students walk in, where we may have helped a student get home for a certain break. We helped a student get home from a study abroad trip last year due to a family emergency. We've had students who have needed books. They've needed one book or they've needed something, and we've been able to help them in that case. And it really, a lot of it happens through the special condition form and a family writing a letter. They absolutely need to have a financial aid application on file with us because we also need to incorporate that from a need perspective. But we also have a lot of students that we talk to and try and support through individual appointments that they come in and speak with their financial aid counselor as well.
So do you think the Angel Fund has made a difference?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the past, if we had a student who may have taken a leave of absence or they may have made a decision to attend a different school, we might have recovered a little bit of the money that was earmarked for them. And in the past, what we would have done is we would have taken that, and that would have been what we would have done for changes in circumstance. Now we're able to use that fund to help students who may have filed later or may have other things. And the Angel Fund has helped us respond to those that had a change in circumstance, and we've been able to stretch our dollars to help more students in a much better way.
So I know in past couple years, we've raised around $800,000 per year for Angel Fund. And that's basically, it's a current use fund here at
Correct.
PC. As soon as we get it, basically the development office where I work is almost like the middleman. We give it to you, and then you give it to the students and the families. $800,000 is a lot of money. It's a huge increase in what we started in 2008,
Correct.
2009. Does it meet the need that you see, or is it?
We're not able to meet the full need of our students from the standpoint of just the base budget of what we do for aid.
Right.
So when I have Angel Fund and I have a student who's really struggling to meet just that little bit, I could use more than double in resources no matter what. It just to be able to do that. So yes, the Angel Fund as it's grown has been able to allow us to assist more families or assist students that have bigger issues. Because sometimes, if I go back to the example of when a parent may have passed and you lose an entire income stream from that parent, the need is understandably much greater. And in the past, I may have only been able to apply, give a little bit. Now I might be able to help a little bit more than I would have with a limited pool of funds. I can give them and offer them a little bit more to help them along.
Right. So we talked about some of the more challenging aspects of the job. What are some of the positive aspects? Like, why would someone want to work in financial aid?
There's actually a lot, and I don't know that you instinctively think that this is the career choice. You really don't understand, or at least I didn't understand how varied it can be, how much you you definitely a counseling role, definitely an accounting role, a planning role. You end up being able to meet a whole host of individuals across this campus because the financial aid is one of those pivotal places. We work with student employment, we work with graduate students, we work with undergraduate, we work with continuing education. So for us, we really have an opportunity to really talk to a whole group of constituents on campus. For me, the planning aspects of it, it's new every year. And even though we've got a cycle, there's federal regulations that change. There's institutional strategic initiatives that change. The students change. Their stories change. And it is so heartwarming to watch a student who comes in unsure of themselves, trying to figure out how to navigate the process. And I am so proud when I see some of these students stop by just before they're graduating, and they have become such a wonderful, it's just wonderful to watch how they've changed over time. They're ready to go out and do things, and you feel like you've had a little part of that by helping them have resources that allowed them to learn so much while they're here.
That does sound good. You're right. That isn't the first thing that comes to mind. As someone who has a job in development where that's also not a job where people go to college and say, hey, I want to do that when I get out. I can certainly understand what you're saying and the positive aspects to it. Obviously, you have you people who work here. How big is the staff?
We have 10 staff members, and we have 3 student workers who also are here in the office and are just so important to what we do. So I'll say 13.
There you go. And obviously, your staff talks to a lot of people, whether it's the families or the current students or potential students. In terms of gathering information, what's the best way people can get information from your staff, either in person or online or
wherever?
I
think we've spent an enormous amount of time putting together tools that students should be able to capture on our website. And we know our students are more 24/7 than I would have been when I was a student. So they want things at times it's convenient for them. So right now, I think the web is probably the first place that they really should go because we've got an awful lot out there. We also have connections and links directly to the forms that they need to do. We allow students to check their financial aid status through Cyberfire. Parents can do that as well. So I think technology has aided us in a great deal that allows students and parents to get information quickly. But I don't want to take away the true aspects of being able to talk to somebody. And we have financial aid counselors who are available every day. We have either all of them on availability, or we may have a counselor on call if we've got other initiatives that we're working on in the office, such as reviewing files, which is a big thing. But they always have an opportunity to call our office and speak to someone if they want to talk about how to navigate through this and it doesn't seem so clear with what they're looking at.
Right. And I went online before this and actually went through. You're right. There's just a boatload of information on the website. Yeah. And one of the things I thought was valuable was the price calculator feature, which was, it's been a long time since I went through college. So I was like, wow, this is really in depth. Yeah. But how closely does the number, assuming that you put in all the correct information, which obviously can be problematic, especially if the student's entering it as opposed to, another family member. But assuming that the numbers you put in there are correct, how closely does that align with the financial aid package that someone would receive?
It aligns quite closely in terms of the need-based aspects. We do not put anything out there regarding merit because, again, that's not out of our office. But the need-based portion does. It goes back 1 year. So what we've done is we use the guidelines or what we've done for most recently the 2015-2016 year, because that's the last year we really have cost of attendance information that's valid to give some sense to families about how that will map out. But it's pretty close to based on what's there because it does the same type of calculation as we do on our system when we're looking at our the decisions we make about our institutional dollars.
Got it. All right. Well, yeah, I thought that was pretty useful. Yeah. I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow, I should really, a part of me was like, I should really put this in right now, but my kids are a little young, so I know, who knows. But
it's never too, honestly, if you're starting to look at that and think about how it plays out, it's always helpful to see kind of where you think you're going to stand. It's, you asked me about misconceptions before, and remember I was saying to you that some families just think they self-select themselves out. Right. Because they don't look. If they went to the calculator, they may have a little bit more information that might help them think about moving forward with that process.
And also, is there a negative to doing the financial aid forms?
No, absolutely not. There's nothing. What it does is it really gives you a good sense of where you fall by way of a contribution. And if you're ever looking to do any financing, one thing that is in place is that students can always get a student loan in their own name from the federal government, which is low interest, and it starts building credit and establishing credit for the student. And you absolutely need that free application of the FAFSA to do that. And any parent who looks to explore the Federal Plus loan also is going to need to file the financial aid forms. So if you do them and get them done, even if you don't show a great deal of eligibility, you still are much faster in the process when you're looking at trying to manage how you're going to pay the bill.
And you mentioned if someone asks for an Angel Fund grant later on in the process, even though they might not be calling it that, like you said, the special interest form, they would need a FAFSA on file to start that process as well.
Yeah, and you just want to make sure that, again, and it's always a good time to do it at the time that we've outlined what the requirements are. We strongly, strongly, strongly encourage students to pay attention to our deadlines because, again, one of the things that gets very difficult is for a student who misses our deadlines. I may not have resources available if they miss. So I always encourage students to file the financial aid forms by our published deadline. And again, it's surprising sometimes that families who don't believe that they're going to qualify for aid has needed to come back because something changed in their household that has us relooking at a way to try and assist.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been very informative. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you.